Hi, my name is Maya. I paint because colors say what my mouth cannot. I paint because the world is loud and cruel, and a canvas is the only place that listens. My family never understood that. To them, art was a childish hobby that should have died with the crayons. They said rent is paid with numbers, not brushstrokes. They said art will never feed you, and then they proved their point in the cruelest way. It happened on a Sunday, when everyone gathered in my parents' backyard. The grill smoked. Music crackled from an old speaker. My cousins filmed everything on their phones, always hungry for a laugh. In the center of the yard stood a metal bin. Inside it were my paintings. Months of work, portraits layered with grief and gold leaf, cityscapes pulled from sleepless nights, a small triptych that still smelled faintly of varnish. My brother held a lighter like it was a joke that had gone too far but was still funny to him. My mother whispered that this was for my own good, that I needed to wake up. My father said a clean break is kinder than a slow disappointment. The first canvas curled as the flame kissed it. The colors I had mixed with aching patience warped into black. The heat cracked the varnish like ice breaking under a skater's blade. My cousins laughed. Someone shouted that art cannot feed anyone. I stood there with paint under my nails and a scream locked behind my teeth. I wanted to reach into the fire and save even a corner of sky. A single eyelash from a portrait that had taken me 30 hours, but hands held me back. The smell of smoke sank into my hair. Ash floated up like gray snow and landed on my shoes. That night I washed my hands until the water ran clear. It did not help. My studio was a graveyard of empty nails and pale rectangles on the wall where sunlight used to rest on canvas. I told myself to stop, to fold up that small, stubborn piece of me and hide it somewhere no one could burn. But when the city fell asleep, I reached for a cheap sketchbook. Lines appeared, then shadows, then a pair of eyes that refused to look away. Grief poured into graphite, then into color. I promised the ashes I would not disappear with them. What happened next was not luck. It was a quiet chain of choices. A friend who worked nights at a coffee shop gave me a corner wall for 3 small pieces. A stranger stood too long in front of them, then left a card with a name I recognized from the art pages. A phone call led to a white room that smelled of fresh plaster and possibility. A gallery with lights that made colors breathe. A price tag I was afraid to read. Red dots appearing one by one beside my name like small, defiant hearts. But that was later. On that Sunday in the backyard, they thought the fire had ended me. They did not understand that heat can also temper steel. Tell me, if the people closest to you burned your dreams to keep you from chasing them, would you let the flames define you? Or would you paint the smoke into a sunrise? The memory of that backyard fire never left me, but the world around it felt so vividly real that sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still smell the smoke. It was late summer, the kind where the air clung heavy to your skin and the cicadas screamed from the trees. My parents' house sat at the edge of town, a red brick home with a white porch swing that had grown rusty from years of neglect. The lawn was trimmed too neatly, every blade of grass sharp as if cut with scissors, but the backyard had always been the stage for my family's dramas. That Sunday, the air buzzed with the sizzle of meat on the grill, the sharp tang of charcoal, and the sound of my cousin's laughter bouncing against the fence. I stood near the wooden picnic table, worn smooth by decades of barbecues. A half-empty pitcher of lemonade sweated in the heat, the glass glistening under the sun. My fingers still had faint streaks of cobalt blue and raw sienna from painting the night before. I hadn't bothered to scrub them clean. To me, paint was never dirt. It was proof that I existed, proof that I was building something, even if they never saw it. But to them, my stained hands were a reminder of failure. My brother Daniel wore a crisp polo shirt, the collar pressed so stiff it looked like it could cut paper. He held a lighter in his hand like it was just another toy, flicking it open and closed as if daring someone to stop him. My mother stood nearby, her apron dusted with flour, her voice calm yet sharp when she said, "Maya, you need to grow up." This art obsession has gone far enough." Beside her, my father adjusted his belt, his expression stern, his words final. "Art doesn't feed anyone. You can't waste your life chasing something that will never take care of you." On the patio table sat the stack of my paintings, canvas after canvas I had poured myself into for months. Some were wrapped in brown craft paper, others still smelled of drying oil and turpentine. The colors caught the sunlight, crimson bleeding into indigo, pale yellows glowing against deep greens. They looked alive, even as they waited for their execution. My cousins circled the pile like vultures, phones raised, recording. One of them whispered, "This will go viral. Who burns paintings? This is gold." Another giggled, her voice dripping with mockery. "Say goodbye to your masterpieces, Maya. Maybe next time you'll try something useful." The lighter sparked. A small flame licked the corner of one canvas. I remember the sound most clearly, the faint crackle as the paint blistered, the hiss of varnish melting, the canvas tightening under the heat until it snapped. The smell of burning oil and pigments mixed with the sweetness of grilled corn. It was grotesque, the collision of celebration and destruction. My body wanted to move, to scream, to save them. But I felt hands on my shoulders, my uncle's firm grip, keeping me back as if I were the one out of control. My throat burned with unshed words, my chest heavy with a scream that never made it out. The ash rose slowly, drifting like dark butterflies. It clung to the lemonade pitcher, settled in the potato salad, landed in my hair. Each flake carried a piece of me. I wanted to pluck them from the air and stitch them back together, but they disintegrated before I could catch them. I stood there, my eyes stinging from both the smoke and the betrayal, while the people who claimed to love me laughed and clapped as if this was a performance, as if my humiliation was entertainment. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the shame and the heartbreak, something stirred. A voice whispered that fire could destroy, yes, but it could also forge. They thought they were ending my story. In truth, they were giving me the opening scene. The laughter that followed was sharper than the flames. It cut deeper than the smoke that scratched my lungs. I stood there, hands trembling, as the fire consumed not just canvas and pigment, but months of sleepless nights, sketches turned into dreams, and dreams turned into something tangible. All of it gone in seconds. "Look at her face," Daniel sneered, pointing at me while my cousins roared with laughter. "Like we just killed her pets. Maya, wake up. Paintings don't feed anyone." His words echoed in the yard. They weren't just mocking my art, they were mocking me. My mother's voice followed, heavy with false kindness. "Sweetheart, we're doing this for you. One day you'll thank us. Better you feel the sting now than the ruin later." I swallowed hard, the taste of smoke bitter in my mouth. "You had no right," I whispered, my voice hoarse but shaking with fury. My father's glare pinned me where I stood. "Enough. You live under this roof. You follow our rules. And this..." He gestured to the flames, where a portrait of mine was twisting into black flakes. "This nonsense is over." The air was filled with their judgment, layered over the crackle of burning paint. Every time I tried to step forward, someone blocked me, an uncle with a warning look, a cousin pushing me back as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. But inside me, it wasn't tantrum, it was heartbreak. I thought of the nights I had worked by candlelight when electricity was too expensive to waste. The hours I spent blending blues until they became skies that breathed. The self-portraits I had painted when loneliness pressed too hard against my chest. They weren't just paintings. They were proof I had survived. And now, to them, it was nothing but fuel for their cruel performance. "I won an award for one of those," I said suddenly, the words breaking out of me louder than I intended. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. "At the community center last spring. You never came. You never asked. But you don't even care, do you?" The yard went silent for a beat, and for a second I thought maybe I had broken through. Maybe they would finally look at me and see more than a joke. But then my cousin Sarah snorted. An award from a community center? Please. You think that means anything? Laughter burst again. This time it felt like they were piling ash on top of me, burying me alive under ridicule. I wanted to scream, to shove the fire pit over and drag out what little remained of my work. Instead, I stood frozen, nails digging crescents into my palms, smoke clawing at my throat. My silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. Because if I opened my mouth any wider, I would shatter. That night, when the embers had cooled and only charred frames remained, my family went back inside as though nothing had happened. My mother hummed while washing dishes. My father settled into his chair with the newspaper. My cousins posted videos online, captioned with laughing emojis. And I sat in the backyard alone, staring at the ruins. My fingers itched to reach for a brush, but my canvases were gone. My chest ached with humiliation, but beneath it all was a quiet rage, a fire even stronger than the one that had destroyed my art. They believed they had silenced me. What they didn't realize was that fire doesn't just burn, it also ignites. That backyard fire was not the first time my family tried to erase me. It was simply the loudest. For years, their disapproval had been a constant hum in the background of my life, like static you can never switch off. Every time I picked up a brush, I carried their voices with me, the ones that told me I was wasting time, that art was a dead end, that dreams were for other people. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a box of crayons and a sheet of paper torn from my father's office printer. I drew a sunrise, thick bands of orange bleeding into yellow, a sky that looked too alive for a child's hand. When I held it up, proud and shy, my mother barely looked. "That's nice, Maya," she said, her tone the same as when she talked about folding laundry. Then she slid the paper into the trash as she wiped the counter clean. At 12, I painted my first portrait. It was of my grandmother, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap. I had stayed up past midnight, smuggling candles into my room, carefully layering shadows until her eyes seemed to glow from the canvas. The next morning, when I showed it at breakfast, my father chuckled. "Cute. But don't think this will get you into college." He pushed the painting aside to make room for his coffee cup. By high school, I had filled sketchbooks with faces, landscapes, and worlds no one else could see. My art teacher, Mrs. Kent, told me I had a gift. She begged my parents to let me apply to an art program, even offered to help with a scholarship. But my mother shook her head. "Scholarships don't pay rent. Maya needs a real future." The conversation ended there. The application was never filled out. When I turned 16, I secretly submitted a piece to a local youth art competition. I won second place. I came home with a ribbon, my chest bursting with pride. I pinned it to my wall, imagining that maybe this was the proof they needed to believe in me. That night, my brother tore it down during an argument and ripped it in half. "Nobody cares about your little drawings," he spat. I taped it back together, but it never looked the same. The pattern never stopped. At birthdays, my gifts were dismissed as useless trinkets. Once I painted a portrait of my mother from an old photo, her smile radiant and young. She stared at it for a moment, then set it face down on the table. "It's not practical," she said flatly. "Why don't you study accounting like your cousin?" And still, I painted. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I let the colors pour out of me. Sometimes it felt like art was the only thing keeping me alive, the only proof that I existed beyond the narrow lines they had drawn around me. But the worst wounds weren't always the insults. They were the moments of invisibility. The family dinners where I would try to speak and no one listened. The reunions where they introduced me as Maya, the one who hasn't figured out her life yet. The way they celebrated every achievement of my siblings and cousins, jobs, degrees, houses, while mine were met with silence. The fire in the backyard was only the culmination of years of quiet erasure. To them, burning my paintings wasn't cruel. It was logical. They were just cleaning up what they saw as wasted space, wasted time, wasted potential. What they didn't realize was that their cruelty was shaping me in ways they could not see. Each slight, each dismissal, each burned bridge only added to the fire inside me. A fire that told me I didn't need their approval. A fire that whispered I could survive without them, even if I had to rebuild my dreams from ashes. So when my paintings turned to smoke that day, it wasn't just art that was lost. It was every childhood memory of being silenced, every teenage hope crushed, every adult dream mocked, collected into flames and carried away on the wind. But ashes have a way of fertilizing new ground, and from that destruction, something was about to grow, something they never expected. In the weeks after the fire, the house felt colder even in the heat of summer. My studio was stripped bare, empty nails on the walls, paint-stained rags left behind like ghosts of something that once lived. For days, I couldn't even look at a brush without my throat tightening. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames swallowing the colors I had loved, turning them into blackened curls of nothing. But silence doesn't last forever. One evening, my best friend Clara stopped by with a paper bag of groceries. She took one look at me, sitting on the floor surrounded by empty frames, and shook her head. "Maya, you can't let them take this from you." "I don't have anything left," I whispered. Clara knelt beside me and pulled a sketchbook from her bag. "Then start again. They can burn canvas, but they can't burn what's in your hands." That night, I drew. At first, my lines were shaky, hesitant, as though I was learning to breathe again. But slowly, the shapes took form: faces, colors, shadows, fragments of memory stitched together on the page. Every stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself from the ashes. A week later, Clara convinced me to hang 3 small sketches at the coffee shop where she worked. It was nothing grand, a dim corner near the window where customers sipped lattes and scrolled through their phones. I expected no one to notice, but one afternoon, a man lingered at the corner table far longer than most. He studied my drawings with a frown of concentration, then a slow smile. Before leaving, he slipped a business card under the frame. I found it later that night. Adrian Walsh, Gallery Curator. My heart stuttered as I traced the embossed letters. I almost didn't call. Fear gnawed at me. Fear of rejection. Fear that he would laugh the way my family had. But Clara dialed for me and shoved the phone into my hand. Adrian's voice was calm, thoughtful. "Your work has presence," he said. "It feels alive. I'd like to see more." My breath caught. "I don't have more. They were destroyed." "Then make new ones," he replied simply. "Bring me what rises from the ashes." Something shifted in me then. For the first time, someone outside of Clara saw me. Really saw me. It was as though Adrian had handed me a key, and behind it was a door I had been too afraid to push open. I worked harder than ever before. Nights blurred into mornings as I painted with a fury I had never known. I poured every insult, every laugh, every mocking word into the canvas. My brushstrokes were no longer timid. They were bold, defiant, alive. The colors screamed where my voice once could not. When I finally walked into Adrian's gallery weeks later, clutching 3 fresh canvases, my hands shook, but not from fear, from anticipation. This was the moment my family's fire had unknowingly lit. And though I didn't yet know it, these canvases would not stay on the walls for long. They would leave, one by one, carried into the hands of strangers who saw what my family never could. The gallery smelled faintly of plaster and polish, the kind of clean, sterile scent that made every sound echo louder than it should. My heart pounded as I stepped through the wide glass doors, clutching my portfolio against my chest. The walls gleamed white, lined with canvases that seemed to breathe under the perfect lighting. This was not my world. At least, not yet. Adrian met me in the center of the room, his black glasses catching the glow from the track lights above. "Maya," he said warmly, "I've been waiting to see what you've done." My hands trembled as I unzipped the portfolio and revealed 3 new canvases. A self-portrait fractured into shards of color, a city skyline melting into flame, and a faceless figure reaching through smoke. The paint was still fresh, the colors so raw they felt alive. Adrian studied them in silence, stepping closer, his expression unreadable. Each second stretched into eternity. Finally, he turned to me with a small smile. "These are not just paintings, they're survival. I want to show them." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. "Show them? Where?" "At our summer exhibition. 1 night, 3 pieces. If they resonate, we'll talk about more." My knees nearly buckled. An exhibition. A real gallery. The kind of place my family had mocked me for even dreaming about. The weeks that followed were a blur of paint and exhaustion. I created more pieces under Adrian's guidance, each one pulled straight from the marrow of my bones. I painted the fire that had consumed my past work, my family's faces twisted with cruelty, the ashes that had rained down like black snow. I painted my silence, my grief, and finally, my defiance. When exhibition night arrived, the gallery glowed like a jewel against the dark city streets. Guests drifted in wearing silk dresses and tailored suits, glasses of champagne glittering in their hands. My stomach twisted as I watched them approach the walls, their eyes sweeping over works that carried pieces of my soul. And then, it happened. A man in a charcoal suit stopped in front of my fractured self-portrait. He tilted his head, whispered something to his companion, and called over a gallery assistant. A small red sticker appeared beneath the frame. "Sold." I froze. Moments later, another couple paused at the city skyline. The woman touched her chest as though the flames reached out to her. Another red dot. "Sold." By the end of the evening, all of my pieces, every single one, were gone. My name, once a punchline in my family's backyard, was spoken aloud by strangers who valued what I had created. Tears stung my eyes as Adrian leaned close and murmured, "Do you see? They told you art couldn't feed anyone. Tonight, it fed every soul who stood in this room." The gallery buzzed with energy, with recognition, with possibility. I stood in the center of it all, light bathing my face, my hands stained faintly with cobalt and crimson. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. But the sweetest moment came later. As the guests left and the gallery quieted, I checked my phone. A message blinked on the screen, from my cousin Sarah, the one who had laughed the loudest during the fire. "Maya, are these really your paintings? I saw a post from the gallery. They said they sold for thousands. I didn't know." I stared at the words, my lips curling into a bitter smile. They had burned my art, laughed at my dreams, buried me in ash. And now, they were watching from the outside as strangers celebrated the very thing they had tried to destroy. That night, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because the red dots on the gallery walls spoke louder than any answer I could give. The morning after the exhibition, the headlines spread faster than I could comprehend. Blogs, local news outlets, even art critics on social media were buzzing about the young painter whose work sold out in a single night. My name, was written in bold letters where once it had only been whispered with mockery. My phone exploded with messages. Old classmates, former coworkers, even people I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out with words like congratulations and proud. And then came the messages I had secretly expected, from my family. My brother Daniel's text was short, almost trembling in its simplicity. "Hey, maybe we were wrong. Can we talk?" My aunt left a voicemail dripping with false sweetness. "Maya, darling, I always knew you had talent. We're so proud of you." Even my mother, who had stood silently as my art burned, wrote, I want to see your paintings in person. Please." Each word felt like ash in my mouth. Ash because I remembered what they had done. Ash because their sudden respect had nothing to do with love and everything to do with money and recognition. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I walked back into the gallery later that day. Adrian greeted me with a grin. "Maya, the demand hasn't stopped. Collectors are asking when your next pieces will be available." I stepped into the empty exhibition hall, staring at the walls where my art had once hung. The red stickers were still there, bold and undeniable. Proof, not just of sales, but of survival. And then, like an unexpected twist in a story, the doors opened. My family walked in. My mother, father, brother, cousins, all of them. Their eyes darted around the room, searching for proof that this place, this success, was real. Daniel finally broke the silence. "So, this is what you've been doing." I turned to face them, my voice calm, steady. "This is what you burned." They flinched. My words hit harder than I expected. I could see the shame ripple across their faces, though none of them dared admit it aloud. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't realize—" "No," I interrupted. "You didn't want to realize. You thought destroying my work would destroy me. But all it did was give me more to paint." The silence that followed was thick, heavier than the smoke that had filled our backyard that day. They shifted uncomfortably. Their pride cracked open under the weight of truth. Finally, I walked to the center of the room, where a single new canvas stood on an easel. I had painted it after the exhibition, ash rising into a sky of color, hands reaching upward from fire. At the bottom, faint outlines of faces, blurred and fading. "This," I said, gesturing to the painting, "is the story you gave me. You thought you were ending me. Instead, you made me unforgettable." For once, none of them had anything to say. Their silence was my victory. Their shame was my justice. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply stood there, proud and unshaken, letting the walls of the gallery and the red dots on my name speak for me. And in that moment, I realized revenge didn't have to be fire against fire. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge was thriving in the very light they swore you would never reach. When the gallery lights dimmed and the echoes of footsteps faded, I found myself alone among the white walls. The silence was different here. It wasn't the silence of dismissal or mockery. It was the silence of space being made for me, for my voice, for my art. That night, I walked home through the city streets, the cool air brushing against my face. My phone buzzed again and again, offers from galleries, interview requests, collectors wanting to reserve future works. And yet, I felt no rush to answer. For once, I was in control. Back at my apartment, I set down my bag and stared at the corner where my easel stood. The canvas was blank, but for the first time in years, it didn't intimidate me. It invited me. It whispered that the fire in the backyard had not been an ending, but a beginning. A few days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't from a gallery or a critic. It was from a community art center downtown. They wanted me to host a small workshop for children, to teach them what it means to turn pain into color. I smiled as I read it, remembering myself at 12, begging to be seen. Maybe I couldn't rewrite my childhood, but I could help someone else hold on to theirs. As for my family, they stayed silent after our encounter at the gallery. Weeks passed without another message, and I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. Their absence was no longer a wound. It was freedom. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine them scrolling through the news, seeing my name attached to exhibitions they can't enter, to paintings they can't buy back. I wonder if they regret the day they fed my art to the flames. But whether they do or not no longer matters. Their opinion had once been my prison. Now, it was nothing more than smoke on the wind. On the wall above my bed, I taped a single sentence I had written in my sketchbook after the fire. They burned my paintings, but they couldn't burn my voice. Every morning, I wake to those words. Every night, I fall asleep knowing I lived them. They tried to erase me with fire. Instead, they carved me into memory with flame. And this time, the world was watching.